Hi, Janet. So good to see you.
Hi, Roland. It's good to see you too.
Well, it's great to be together, isn't it? I got my cup of coffee for our chat. Hopefully, you've got your cup of coffee.
I've got my cup of coffee.
That'll relax us, put us in the
Yeah.
mood for the conversation that's ahead of us. Which reminds me that this process that we're going through, we are really wanting to simply engage with the ideas presented in the book and then talk about them as a group of people. So almost our conversation here becomes something of a model of how to talk about it. We're going to explore some concepts, but certainly not everything that's here in the chapter. What we're trying to do is invite everybody that listens to this into a much deeper engaged conversation. So it's not about questions and answers. It's about talking about what we're seeing and engaging with the ideas. Of course, if in that conversation we need a little bit of prompting and help, at the end of the video, there will be consecutively 3 slides taking questions from the back of the book and putting them there for us to consider about. And if your conversation needs prompting, you can do 1, 2, or all 3 of those. And if it really needs help, you can go to the back of the book. There's another four or five questions at the back of the book in addition to those. So there are questions to answer, but our hope is simply that we engage in the conversation. So, how were you struck with this chapter on being formed? It flows straight on from the last chapter that we were in, that was speaking to the process that we're engaged in, which we had a lot of fun with. But now we're talking about this idea of being formed, and he makes the point that that isn't just an easy thing to get into. So, how were you impacted by this chapter?
Yeah. He starts with this idea, kind of this comparison or contrast between doing and being, and our tendency to want to do things ourselves rather than just to be and allow
Mhm.
things to be done to us or allow God to work in our lives. And as I'm reading that, I'm looking at it going, huh, is that true for me? And I think it is in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of the things that we do in the church are about doing for ourselves, right? They're good practices, but we're doing them to try to make ourselves be good Christians rather than allowing ourselves to just be in the space where God can do that work. But I definitely see that tendency in myself. Do you see it in you
Yeah,
too?
definitely, 100%. That's been one of my biggest struggles in life. In fact, I think that's
Yeah,
probably why we come back to this exact issue very often.
right.
What we're trying to articulate, and it's really important to be clear at this, it's not that what we do doesn't matter. It is that what we do always informs how we see ourselves, our being. And when our focus is constantly on what we do, we can change behavior. But the drive to change the behavior actually says something about us. And the extent to which a new behavior becomes formed in us is the extent to which that sits with who we actually are. And our
Right.
struggle is who we are has been distorted by sin and brokenness and shame. And so we come back to this place over and over again. It's not that we are articulating that it doesn't matter what we do. It does matter what we do. It matters what we do as a reference of who we actually are. And what we're inviting everyone, including ourselves, is into a space where God is changing who we are, which literally implicitly changes what we do, and then what we do conforms to this holy uh, representation of ourselves and the world in which we're engaged. And the problem is people get focused on the doing, so morality becomes very important. It's not that morality isn't important, but Jesus said, it is our hearts that are the issue. And he said in the form of the eating ceremonies, the holy eating ceremonies, it's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you, it's what comes out of it. And that's representing that idea. Yeah.
I think I would say that this reversal actually is evident in the first three books of Genesis, right? You see you see man and woman being created in the image of God, right? In the image of God they were created, and this is a good and very good thing. And in that state, God gives them kind of two mandates, right? To fill the earth, to have children, and then the second one is to have dominion over everything that fills the earth, right? And it's to work. And then the fall happens, and I think that gets backwards. Like before the
Mhm.
fall, we were given these mandates because of who we were created to be, right? That those tasks flew out of our identity. And then after the fall, now we're trying to earn our identity by doing the mandates, right?
And that
Yeah.
speaks directly to the issue that he focuses on for quite a little bit, which is the issue of control, which is really a really perceptive uh, idea uh, that he presents, because it's not necessarily clear on the surface that that's what's happening, right? When you dig deep, you can see how much we try to control ourselves and our circumstances and other people around us. You can find that, but it's not how you intuitively think about things. You are simply thinking about living life and doing things as a result of that. But that control issue, which he does a really good job of reflecting on, saying that I like the way he says that if this book was suggesting ways that we could be formed in the image of Christ by by our activities, we would probably very easily gravitate to the book. But the idea that what we're doing is exploring how to be more available to God transforming us actually rubs against that process. And
Yeah.
I think that for me, it's true that one of the great processes that I've been in through my life is recognizing how extensively my need to control circumstances and people around me has impacted me. In the first place, I recognized my temper was doing that, my being in charge was doing that, my inability to accept another person's opinion was doing that. But as I and so those were the first things I started allowing God to change in me. But I've got so many subtle ways that I've done that across the lot years that I haven't really been aware of it until God's pointed it out. Yeah. So that control issue is important.
And I would say for me, it's also important, but I'm not sure that it doesn't evidence itself in the same way, right? Like I think for me, my need to control was actually found in the opposite, which was submission, not
Oh,
stating
okay.
my, not
Right.
doing these things, right? Because if I don't, then I can still protect myself. I
Right.
can choose to make this person feel a certain way by not saying
Right. You're
something
not
or not,
taking a risk.
right? I'm not taking a
Yeah.
risk. I'm still not allowing them to see me, which keeps me in control,
Oh,
right?
that's a really good. That's a really good observation. So the key there is not allow it. So yeah, I get it. What you're saying. We take control of circumstances because we have this inbuilt shame-driven desire to not have people see who we really are. And so I
Yeah.
can assert control by that manipulative process that for me is very real. But you're saying even the very process of conceding authority or conceding control of the situation actually is a way of controlling because it doesn't force you to step out and reveal yourself.
Right. It helps me to create an image that people like me, right? And I allow them to see a particular identity that I want to be rather than allowing them to see me,
Which
right?
actually brings about a really interesting process that's highlighted in the final part of the chapter, which is the editor's insertion. But this idea of prayer and silence, I like the way that puts it in there because at the end point he says that even if you aren't able to get to the place of genuine, complete, and utter silence, be happy with the desire to create that space. But the imposition, if that's a good word, I'm not sure it is, but the imposition on that is trying to get us to move to the place where we concede control by being silent, allowing God to speak into a space. For me, very often, the actual effort it takes to be silent um, puts me in control of the circumstances. But I very clearly get what he's talking about, and that's my own personal struggle, right? But yeah. So, what do you think about that prayer and silence as a process of
Yeah.
taking control?
So in the school where I teach, we actually use contemplative prayer. We teach all of our new counselors contemplative prayer, sitting in silence before God. And part of the reason is what we have found is that it quiets people internally so that they don't feel like they need to control the conversation or control the outcome for the people that they're working with, right? But it is a whole process to teach them this. And um, I have grown in my own walk to really appreciate just sitting in silence with God. But I don't think that that's the way we've been taught in at least the evangelical church, right? We've been taught that petitionary prayer is the way that you pray, you speak. You have to
Yeah.
do things. God is only going to act if you ask him to act, right? And so we've got words that we say, even
Yes.
magic words that we say to manipulate God, to control God,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Rather than
Absolutely.
rather than just say, God, I'm here,
And they
right?
all
Have
have
your way.
this stamp of spirituality on them, right? So we honor each other for using those manipulative terms, and without condemning too much, but we do have this formula where we think that if I can get more people praying, God is more likely to listen, or if I can pray for longer, God is more likely to listen. And there's nothing wrong with lots of people praying for the same thing, nor is there any problem with staying a long time in the place of prayer. That's a being doing issue, right? The problem comes when we think that that asserts some kind of control over God, when the best way to think about prayer is our lives lining up with what God has already desired to do. So our conception of what is supposed to happen, we try to impose upon God. But what we need to be doing is using that space to align with God, which God very well often then is able to speak to us about ways that we can become personally engaged in whatever it is we're praying about.
But
Do
think about
you?
the way we control identity in this, right? Like when I speak to God, I'm telling God how I want him to see me. When I sit in silence before God, I let God see me as I am. And what I have found in teaching this, and even with clergy, is that that is one of the scariest things that they can do,
Yeah,
right?
it really is. The truth is, and maybe you can confirm in your own life what I'm about to say. I'll give you the chance to do that. Uh, God actually does speak in that space, right? We begin to form thoughts that, when we analyze them, have a transcendent quality. It's like I've had that many times where you see, okay, that thought makes so much sense and works so well. I'm not sure I can actually claim that thought as my own, because it has this quality to it that is more than what I am. And
Absolutely.
that's how I think we come to see God speaking to us.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've had that experience too. I'm also thinking how our need for control just comes out in sitting in silence, that we get mad and we feel shame if we can't sit there in silence, right? Or if we don't experience God doing something, that we feel that somehow I'm doing this wrong, or that sort of thing. One of the leaders of this, Father Keating, he's a Catholic priest. He says that every time we get distracted and then we come back to God, that God is there with open arms, just waiting for us to come back. And where we beat ourselves up for it because we're not doing correctly, God is saying, "Come back, child. I just want to be with you again."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. One of the things that he says in this chapter that I would like to just adjust a little bit. I think I understand his intent, but he says that part of the problem there is we want our timing, but we have to learn how to wait for God's timing. I
Hmm.
don't think God's timing is about a completion of a project towards which we're working, and that God has mapped out that timing. I think God's timing is that, and I'm sure, given everything else he writes, you would agree. But God's timing is that right here now I can be like Him in this situation, in this and in this circumstance, which is developing an ongoing transformational process. We may have a goal in mind that we arbitrarily put over the top of that, and then we say that's what I want to be. And God's timing is much more about the way that He's unpacking us, becoming all that He wants us to be. And that does
Absolutely.
bring us back very clearly to this idea of doing, determining, being. He does this wonderful representation. Well, it's not wonderful. It's a bit shocking, but he uses the suicide issue to make that point. And the point he makes is that it is at least observable at some level. But one of the causes of suicide, I don't want to go down the, I'm sure both of us don't want to go to the idea of analysis of suicide too much, but it's the idea that having lost the capacity to do, we've lost the sense of identity. And he continuously comes back to this phrase that he uses, the phrase where he says meaning, value, purpose, and identity, which are obviously the big theme for us as well. But that the suicide is a representation of a loss of those things because of the loss of doing.
And we see that, as a psychologist, I see this when I work with people. If they experience some kind of significant loss, like a loss of a relationship or a loss of a job, or they retire, or the loss of a marriage, um, very often that moves them to depression. And if they're not able to figure out, who am I now going to be? What is
Yeah.
my identity now going to be? Right? That they can very quickly move to this place of hopelessness that can lead to suicide. But it's the loss of identity in that that really fits with what we're talking about here. Right? As long as I have a role in which I can do, I feel okay about myself. But as soon as I lose that role, right, in which I'm doing, then I don't know who I am. And that's what throws us into crisis.
That's the order that we naturally find ourselves in, and that's what we're trying to reverse here. In what God is trying to reverse here, that it is what He's doing in us to transform us that impacts our doing and gives quality and value, purpose, and meaning to what we do as a result of having those things in who we are. And it reflects that in observations about Jesus' temptation, which we don't have time to go in thoroughly today, but there's a section where it begins with the phrase, we learn from Jesus' experience, however, and then he goes on to talk about the critical temptation. And that's where he leads down to this idea of meaning, value, and purpose. But
Yeah.
it's interesting how he connects the temptation with identity. And I think that's a really good observation, that the temptations that we struggle with the most are temptations that, well, perhaps they all do, collect around the idea of who we are expressed
Right.
through what we do.
Yeah. So this is not Christian at all, but it's so related to this. There's this great book called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he's talking about how to build a new habit, this new like kind of thing that you want to do. And he has a whole chapter. He says, if you want to develop a new habit, you have to begin to see yourself as a person who does that thing. Right.
Right.
And essentially what he's saying is that until your identity changes, you're never going to be able to live that out consistently.
Yep.
Right.
Wow,
Because
that's great.
doing forms comes out of being.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to do this new habit enough that you become that person. You have to think about being that person, and then the doing will flow out of it. Yeah.
So capturing that thought in our language, Christ likeness, holiness is utterly about who we are, not about what we do. It is
Yeah.
subsequently reflected in what we do.
Right. Right. Because if you are becoming like Christ, right, you will begin to act like Christ. You will begin to live like Christ. But you can't make yourself do that until the work's been done inside.
And that's the idea of being formed. What a wonderful thought, Janet. Thank you for helping us get to that
Yeah,
place. I love
this has
this
been fun.
conversation. So, folks, have a good chat about that, and let's see where that goes. Think about the identity and the doing thing. This has been fun, Janet. Thank you so much.
Been great. Bye bye.